Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and the Eating at a Meeting podcast, which you're listening to now. Here on the Eating at a Meeting podcast, we talk to food and beverage experts in all facets of food and beverage to get their take on trends and medical needs and dietary restrictions and farming, everything. Because when we serve food and beverage, we should have a better breadth of knowledge about what's going on in the food and beverage industry across the board. Today's guest is a director of meetings and special events at a large hotel in New Orleans, the Ritz Carlton, James Filtz, who's a CMP and CPCE, and we'll explain those later. And he's been in the catering industry for his entire adult career. And so he's got a lot of experience with catering, and we're going to talk to him about what he sees currently with COVID going on and what we're going to talk about, what we'll see in the future. So welcome to the show, James.
Thank you very much for having me today, Tracy. Great to be on your show.
You're welcome. I'm excited to chat with you. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I just love your philosophy around catering and especially with the Ritz, what you're doing there. So I want to delve into that. But right now, I want to talk about the fact that you're in New Orleans. And even Al Gore was talking about all the hurricanes this morning. It's still just recapping it. But you guys got hit hard this season. So how has that impacted you, the hotel, the industry there over and above COVID?
New Orleans was in the cone of impending hurricanes about 7 times this season so far. And fortunately, the city was able to dodge the worst effects in almost all of them. One of the last ones that did hit us pretty hard. And it was more of a wind damage hurricane, which is a lot more commonplace than the flooding damage. Fortunately, I think a lot of our flooding infrastructure in the city has been fixed over the years. And it wasn't a very heavy rainstorm. It was the 100-mile-an-hour winds that came in from the hurricane that really hit the city pretty hard. And a lot of people in the community lost power for upwards of 3 or 4 days. Fortunately, the French Quarter and the Central Business District, where a lot of the hotels are at, have better power resources because of their, the downtown environment. So that was good. The hotel never lost power, but a lot of our ladies and gentlemen certainly were without power for a little while. Because it was COVID, the hotel was a lot less busy, which probably helped in some degree. But because it was COVID too, the little business that happened to be in the city over that weekend certainly was not able to take place. So fortunate and unfortunate in different ways this year.
Definitely. And I think in our conversation earlier last month, I guess it was, you mentioned that you actually have families living in the property.
So not currently. The city, though, the city does have a lot of people that were evacuees from Lake Charles area, Louisiana, that were living throughout the city. So a lot of our sister hotels in town were hosting families for upwards of 2 to 3 months. The impact of these hurricanes has lasted a long time now.
Wow.
We've operated with normal type of guests, business travelers, leisure travelers, group guests from time to time. But none of the official evacuees have been staying at the property.
Okay. So jumping to that, the fact that you have been hosting business travelers and such, you've been open the entire time through the pandemic. You never shut down?
The hotel has been open continuously since, the middle of March when this all really hit the city really badly. We did have some very limited services for a little while. such as like our food and beverage was limited in-room dining only for a little while. Our spa was closed for a month or two. But by 4th of July weekend, we were operating mostly at normal levels, with the exception that our outlets are currently closed Sunday through Wednesday. They're open Thursday through mid-Sunday right now.
And you've been doing meetings at the property as well. I think you've had a couple of pretty big ones too, right?
That's right. We've hosted a variety of small, 10, 20, 30 person groups, but we did have a large group of about 75, which is large for us these days. They were with us in early October, and we've hosted a few larger 150 plus size groups, one in October, one in November. They were pretty high profile. I'm not able to talk about who the client was, but they were larger groups, and they were groups that were, they had to travel for the nature of their business.
Well, yeah, and it's none of our business who those clients were, but how everybody's very concerned about COVID and physical distancing and food service. So can you talk a little bit about what you did for those programs?
Sure, of course. So for that first larger program that we had in October, the property did invest a lot in extra PPE equipment for both, continued more capital type use, and then also more temporary use. So the portable hand sanitizer stations, of which you see everywhere now, we made a large investment in getting those in all key areas of the hotel. Touchless soap dispensers throughout the hotel have been something that we've done. Obviously, our ladies and gentlemen, health and safety is one of the most important things for us. So all of our ladies and gentlemen get temperature checked on the way in the building. They're allowed to wear their own black mask, or they're allowed to wear a surgical style disposable mask. And that way all of our ladies and gentlemen look uniform, and we know that they are wearing something appropriate and safe. They're not allowed to wear things with logos or brand names, things like that on them, because that's distracting for our guests. We also had to invest a lot in serving mitigation equipment. So plexiglass screens and guards to keep the guests from being able to breathe or cough or get within a certain radius of food. A lot of our ladies and gentlemen that have come back, we have an extensive Marriott cleanliness and safety training program that they go through as they come back to work. That's online tools and resources. And some of that is company-wide data, which is great. And some of that is specific to luxury brands such as the Ritz Carlton. But it was a lot of changing the paradigm of what we've been doing and how we've been doing it. Guests at a lot of events are used to serving themselves, and now all of a sudden we're serving them. We used to allow people to grab loose items and sort of self-package and portion them for themselves, and now all those items are either being packaged and portioned by us or pre-purchased in those ways. So a lot of time and attention went into, packaging and items and vessels to a large degree. Different groups obviously have different needs for that. A lot of our groups we've been able to still serve on traditional Ritz Carlton china, which is certainly our preference when possible, because it doesn't create all that landfill exposure or waste. So whenever possible, we've continued the Ritz Carlton quality there. But sometimes it's unavoidable. It has to go in a paper bag, or it has to go into a clamshell container of some kind.
Well, that all sounds very doable, and everybody's felt, your meeting planners have felt that their guests are comfortable.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things that is difficult for any group is that the meeting plan. We communicate very profoundly and prolifically with our ladies and gentlemen, and the meeting planners need to do the same thing with their guests to keep their guests safe, which includes, wearing their mask when they're not in an area where they're allowed to take their mask off. Currently in Louisiana, people are required to wear their mask at all times in public areas unless they're actively eating or drinking. So when they're eating a meal, certainly they're allowed to take their mask off, or drinking, they can take their mask off. but they're not allowed to be up and about without their mask on. They're not allowed to go up to a food and beverage buffet without their mask on. So certainly a large part of our internal training is how our ladies and gentlemen engage with guests to sort of encourage them to put their mask on, and how meeting planners can sort of pre-communicate and proactively, inform their guests about what the regulations are here. We get groups from all over the country, and because of that, some areas have different regulations, and it's just a matter of making them aware of what our policy here is in the hotel per the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, and that's just got to be so challenging in and of itself, because every state is different, and every city, some cities inside the states are different, and just making sure that everybody's up to speed on what's going on in that, where that specific location is got to be challenging in and of itself.
Yeah, and in New Orleans, it's a little bit easier because it is the law here, whereas in some other areas, venues or hotels or companies might be putting mask mandates in place that are company policy or, an enforced policy of the organizer. Whereas here in Louisiana, it's not even up for debate. It's the law here. So it's not that we're requiring you to wear a mask. It's not that we're being difficult. It's that the state requires us to enforce these rules. And if we were found to be allowing people not to follow the rules, we would get in trouble too.
Yeah. And that's, we just all want to be nice and take care of each other. Mm-hmm. So, okay. One of the questions that you and I talked to, or I had actually asked, what do you want me to ask you? And we talked about it briefly. It is really kind of a fun way to look at it. What positive disruptive effects has COVID had on catering and event spaces? I mean, we kind of look at, hey, this is how we've done this. And, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this now? Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But how can we take this disruption and be really inventive and creative with that? I mean, we're in the events industry. That's what we do for a living. So and actually I should tell everybody that you're the incoming president-elect for the National Association for Catering and Events, correct? That's
right. So I'm vice president now, and I move into that president-elect role January 1st.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you got 3 more years on the board after this one.
That's right. So to answer your question about the disruption, one of the things that has been very profoundly impactful for our guests and our ladies and gentlemen is waste reduction. So when we used to set these buffets before, people would serve themselves. They would go to a buffet line, and the first thing on the buffet would look delicious. So they would take a whole scoop of that. And the second thing would look delicious, and they take a whole scoop of that. And by the time they get it to the end of the buffet, they would have a gigantic mounding things of food, or they would go back a second time because there were things they couldn't eat. Now that people aren't allowed to serve themselves, our ladies and gentlemen are now serving the guests, and they're allowed to talk to them about what's on the buffet. They're able to better calibrate portion size for people, knowing how much of something people are likely to want to have. And people have to be a little bit more mindful. Instead of just grabbing and mindlessly taking food, our staff are now engaging with them, telling them about the food, telling them how spicy or not spicy it is, telling them about whether an ingredient is indigenous to Louisiana, or what something is, or, as I know you talk a lot about on your show, what allergy or food safety attributes a food item might have, and be able to talk to the guest about that. So it's been amazing that we've been able to engage more with our guests. We've seen our food waste go down. The amount of food that we need to prepare per guest has certainly dropped as a result. And, people are enjoying the food that we're serving more than ever, I think. That's awesome. And I love the concept of what's indigenous to Louisiana and to New Orleans, because everybody loves to talk about and eat Louisiana style food. Everybody, I mean, it's got that spice and all that. And so I think that's really a great way to bring the city to the food and beverage aspect of it. We lose that a lot when we're planning events, right. We don't really talk about it, and that does. So you're ladies and gentlemen, and I love that term versus just saying our servers and our kitchen staff, right? How much training do they get to understand that? And is that something just with your property, or is that Ritz Carlton across the board? So one of the fundamentals of our Ritz Carlton training is daily lineup. So every single day, leaders around the hotel have daily lineup with their ladies and gentlemen. And this is a tradition that started back in the kitchen. I actually started in the kitchen myself. And lineup is like one of those core fundamental elements before the staff gets started with their shift. They have a lineup with usually the executive chef or general manager, and they go through what the business expectations are of the day, check uniforms, cleanliness, professionalism. And we do all that, but we also talk about the Ritz Carlton culture. We call them our gold standards of our service values that we believe in, the credo of the company, and the motto, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen, of course. So every day we talk to them about our culture and who we are as a brand and a company. And it's an engaging discussion where we have them share stories that activate that gold standard of the day. We talk about in the banquet area, specifically the groups that we have coming in. For example, knowing your audience, a lot of times if it is a group that has a very specific demographic or a very specific meeting topic, we'll talk to them about who the group is, why they're here, what they're doing. And then we go through the menu line by line in some cases with the staff, especially if it's a plated menu, because there are fewer selections, we can go into a lot of depth with the staff. If it's a buffet menu, we certainly go through the high level data and share any of the information we can about special ingredients we're serving. Maybe something was requested by a client and it's important to highlight that. Maybe we modified a food item that normally contains X, Y, Z, and we've taken that out to accommodate something. So to the best of the ability, the staff get as much data as they can from us to relate to the guests that are there. For some of our larger groups, we have whole sort of dietary dossiers in the group, showing that maybe out of a group of 200, 20 of them happen to be vegetarian, 15 of them are vegan, 30 of them are pescatarian. And then if there are people with serious allergies, listing out what those allergies are, so the staff can be aware of that. And then also the culinary team is also prepared because, you do have guests that are groups that have a larger number of pescatarian, vegan, or vegetarian guests, especially if it's a buffet. It helps the kitchen prepare and probably yield out the food so that we don't have a lot of food waste. If the buffet order is set up right too, because that's an important thing to consider as people go through a buffet experience.
Okay, so I love that concept of knowing those dietary needs in advance, especially for when you're talking about the protein side of it.
Yeah.
And managing how that buffet is lined up, because if you're going to have more meat eaters than you have pescatarians, you can reduce the amount of fish that you offer on it. And that's a good sustainability practice right there.
Yeah.
And it's also just a good practice. And I think you and I talked about this before, is knowing who's coming, the demographics of it. So if they are big meat eaters or big fish eaters or something like that you're not giving them something that they're not going to eat.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for meeting planners to understand and know the history, the food and beverage history of their attendees, including what they like and don't like.
Yeah. And I think, whenever I can insert my opinions to clients, certainly I always encourage them to put the vegetables first. I'm not vegetarian, but I do probably eat a larger ratio of vegetables than your average meat eater. And certainly our vegetable dishes here in Louisiana are amazing. So I always try to put those vegetable based dishes first because they are usually the most vibrant in color and flavor and the most sustainable, right? I mean, I don't want to make someone feel like I'm not serving them meat or fish or poultry, but certainly I know, ecologically, it's a lot better to encourage people to eat the vegetable food items on our menus.
And better for their bodies.
Exactly. Yeah. Better for the environment, better for them, better for us. It's win-win-win. Exactly.
No, because when I'm thinking about it, it depends on what property you're at. Sometimes that meat is at the front section of the buffet versus, the salad is always there first, it seems. But so talking about buffets, and let's talk food safety, going through those, everybody touching, going through a large buffet, there's multiple people touching those tongs. Your ladies and gentlemen now serving them. That's great. And now you have plexiglass in front of the buffets.
Yep.
Is this lady and gentleman walking down the aisle with me, or is it the plate getting passed down? What have you found to be a best way to implement that?
In many cases, the same staff person is probably going to follow that guest down the buffet line, and they'll take turns and alternate. That's sort of like a Chipotle type setup where you go in and they, you might get passed off at the very end, but for the most part, the same staff member is serving you throughout the entire way. And one of the things about the buffets and the PPE that I love to point out and stress is that gloves have a place in the Ritz Carlton for safety. But gloves also don't have a place. And we don't want to use gloves as a substitution for hand washing, sanitizing. We don't want to use gloves for the theater of security. We want to use gloves because there's a legitimate safety reason of serving that guest with gloves on. Because the amount of waste and environmental impact that rampant glove use can have is horrible. And then also the false sense of security that people can get from seeing gloves may let them think that things are less safe or more safe than they should or could be.
Such a good point. And it just, for some reason, going to a doctor's office, it reminded me of that. I mean, they just changed the gloves for each patient, right? You don't need to change it because you'd be touching so many things if you just kept wearing your gloves, and it is a big waste. Let's talk about, I'm going to get to dietary restrictions, but food service style. So buffet, preset, passed, just-in-time assembly. Can we talk about, what's the most cost-effective way? What was the most cost-effective way before COVID, now, and then going forward?
So the most cost-effective is really plated food service. Everyone gets their one plate of food. I make exactly what I know. If there are 20 people, I make 21 plates of food or 22, depending on how many over I'm going to prepare for. And there isn't, 3 proteins and 3 starches and 3 vegetables that I have to make. And, you have to make it look plentiful so the guests don't think that you're being cheap with them either. So, certainly plated food service is the best way for us to go. If it can't be plated, action stations where I can control the sort of mise en place flow. And what I mean by that is, a shrimp and grit station, I may only cook the shrimp in small batches. So if only a third of the group actually wants the shrimp, I'm only going to cook a third of that shrimp, and the rest of it's going to stay in my cooler or my freezer until I need to use it. Whereas if I went on a buffet, I'd probably have to make it all in advance, and it would sit there whether I used it or not. So those sort of just-in-time assembly type action stations would probably be the second best, because then at least I can recover or reuse or repurpose some of that food. As long as it doesn't go into an area where guests are eating it, I can certainly do something else with it. And that could be feeding our ladies and gentlemen. That could be using it in another part of our hotel operation. But once it gets cooked and put out, I'm really obligated to use it, or not really. It's sort of sad when you have to put food out for display. At a certain point, it becomes not safe to be repurposed for other items. Right.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that when I'm teaching about food safety and just in general. I'm like, if it's time and sustainability, time and temperature controlled behind the scenes in the back of the house, then it's easily being able to be donated.
Correct. Absolutely.
And or repurposed. Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes too, it's like the finishes. So think about like a pasta station. If you have to make pans and pans and pans of pasta, you might make 3 kinds because you're not sure what sauce people are going to like. Whereas if you can sauce that pasta to order, you probably end up wasting a lot less, because then people are only having the pasta with the sauce that they want versus, making huge volumes in advance.
Right. Exactly. And it does help now that our numbers are lower for meetings, but as we get bigger, so there's a presentation you did for the Events Industry Council. Was that last week or the week before?
I think it was 2 weeks ago now.
2 weeks ago, yeah. So beginning of November, let's middle of November. So you guys can check that out, Events Industry Council. And there was a diagram that you showed, which showed how you were doing your place settings, but also your buffets. And I really liked the serpentine tables and the additional bars. Now, my question, based on what we were just talking about, the serpentines, I think you mentioned that it was like easier to grab and go because there were a lot more of them because it was to reduce the lines. But were those action stations as well? And my point is, does having more of those stations require more food prep, or is it just the same amount of food just distributed to multiple tables?
So to answer your questions, the same amount of food is used when we break up stations into the smaller pods. We probably have staff that are probably a little bit more conscientious about how they're replenishing food stations, because some of them are certainly going to get busier than others and probably need more replenishment. Some of them have chefs and burners and action at them, and some are literally just concession style last minute assembly of, whether it's a grits bowl or, a salad bowl that we're adding a protein to. It's that last minute finish that also allows us to be a little bit more conscientious with portion sizes and toppings. My co-presenter for the EIC panel, Dr. Aurora Dawn Benton, she's got these amazing pictures of these salad buffets and these huge, gigantic bowls of nuts or like seeds. And, so much waste is created when we allow people to sort of make and finish their own salads or things like that. But when we can control that for them behind plexiglass and hand the finished product to them, it also helps me curate the food that I want to serve, right? I don't want the lowest common denominator salad. I want to have a New Orleans themed salad. And if you walk up to the buffet and you say, "Oh, I love this salad. Can I have it without the nuts?" Of course, it's our pleasure because we haven't put the nuts on the salad yet, or we haven't put the dressing on the salad yet. So it allows us to dynamically adapt to what people want to eat. In the case of rice or grits bowl, you have a low carb customer, and I typically eat pretty low carb. I might say I want the vegetables, the meat, and the sauce, but leave out the grits for me. And that's a lot easier when you have all those items separated and the server is putting them together for you.
Yeah, totally. One of the things I joke about is, like, I would rather go to Whole Foods and make my salad than eat a salad at a restaurant, because it is iceberg lettuce with some shredded carrots and some tomatoes on it. It's just really nothing to it. And like you just described, I can go to Whole Foods, which I don't think they have the buffets open now, but I've got all these things that I can make my own delicious salad, like customized. And you're doing that for your guests.
Yeah. And, one of the things that meeting planners did pre-COVID is they wanted salad stations set up so that people would put all their own toppings on these salads.
Right.
And from a dietary standpoint, it works because then people are in control of, what goes on their food. From a food safety standpoint, though, it's not always the cleanest or the safest thing, because people are touching things, the tongs get moved around, the spoons get moved around. And unless you're really watching that stuff like a hawk, things like dairy or nuts or soy can cross-contaminate each other so easily. And it also, why do you go to the Ritz Carlton, New Orleans to have green salad with lettuce, tomato, and cucumber? Like did you really come to the Ritz Carlton, New Orleans for that salad? I hope not. So, when I can give you a Louisiana, crafted, curated salad, but I'm finishing it to order, then I can sort of have engagement with the guest and say, do you have any dietary restrictions or allergies? And that way the server can manage that building and curation process for the guest. That way they feel safe. They're in control of their own utensils and cross-contamination risk. And the guest is able to really talk to that staff member about the food item.
And it just brings to mind, I've been chatting with a lot of people. There's a woman in Dubai that's opened up a kosher catering company, and she's also a sociologist. But just talking about the meaning of food and everything that you've been saying, and engagement around the food and beverage, it's so different than what we typically do, okay, lunch is from 12 to 1, go in here we're plating it up, passing it out, and then now go to your next breakout session, right?
Yeah.
This is so much more intentional and I think thoughtful and even healthier. And hopefully we're going to take a little bit more time in that lunch break instead of trying to throw everybody through it again, because that nobody's digesting anything.
Correct. And people do eat more when they are rushed too. People that have a longer, more leisurely lunch tend to enjoy their food more, tend to eat less, tend to appreciate the craft and the care that went into that creation.
Yeah, and the fact that your ladies and gentlemen are educated on what they're serving, and if it is indigenous and can provide some additional education, I think that's really fun and like you've been saying, is very engaging. And because sitting down at a table and eating a meal with someone can break so many barriers and bond you and I together so much more because we're sharing a meal. But even more so when that meal has been catered to me or customized for my needs or wants, or preferences, right? And it creates that inclusive experience.
Well, and I think especially within the Ritz Carlton, we really pride ourselves on going above and beyond to exceed guest expectations, and that's sort of table stakes for us. Like if a guest comes in and they says that they're gluten-free or dairy-free, the table stakes for us should be that we're prepared to serve them delicious food, within what they would like to eat. But more often than that, it's how do we make that guest feel special in a positive way, that, we went out of our way to do something nice for them, not because we had to or we are required to, because we want to. And that's the sort of the genuine care and comfort that we like to activate within our ladies and gentlemen. And it's really bottom up within our culture versus top down. Any one of our ladies and gentlemen, if they found out that a guest was, let's just say they needed something really special and high end out of the kitchen that we weren't serving at a lunch meal. Let's just say, this is probably a fake story, but let's just say that the guest said they couldn't eat the chicken or the fish, but they could eat beef. We're not serving beef to anyone at the group. That one server would certainly be empowered, without coming to me or a member of management, go up to the kitchen and tell the chef, hey, I need a steak on the fly, medium rare. I just need it with, steamed vegetables. I'll bring it down to the guest directly. Nobody has to ask permission to do that. Nobody needs to, question that server. Why are you going to in-room dining for food? Taking care of the guest and getting them exactly what they want is what our ladies and gentlemen are empowered to do. And I would say, even before, COVID, before, dietary, restrictions became as much of a topic, our staff are trained to listen first. So if they overheard a guest in a meeting room say, oh, I could really die for a Diet Coke, but, this Ritz Carlton, they're Pepsi only. That server would probably overhear that, run to the storeroom, get that guest a Diet Coke and deliver it to them without even asking, because they heard that guest say they wanted something. And it's not about the guest having to ask for anything within our culture. It's about us being aware that they have a desire for something and making it happen without them needing to go through the effort of complaining or asking for something or making it feel like they're, that they have some sort of diva-like quality. And that same server will follow that guest around for the rest of the time and make sure there's Diet Coke in front of them, not because, they have to, but because they want to make that guest feel at home, within our hotel.
Yeah. And my friend Doreen and I were talking about the word welcome, and it is, that's what a meal should do, is you should welcome people into that table, and you want to welcome those people into your property, and your ladies and gentlemen are creating that welcoming environment by having the ability to make those decisions and do that for your guests.
Yeah. And I think that is the difference within our culture of function versus purpose. Take a doorman. The function of a doorman is to open the door. When you get within so many feet, he opens the door and you walk through the door. But that's not his purpose. His purpose is to welcome you. His purpose is to make you feel like you're at home within our property. The same thing could be said for a banquet server. A banquet server's function is to serve you food, but their purpose is to make you feel welcome and nourished and engaged with and educated, in our case, about the food of Louisiana. So I think we do a lot of pre-shift training with our ladies and gentlemen to make sure they're not, we don't have paycheck people here. I mean, people get paid here, and I think we pay great wages in the Ritz Carlton, but people are here because they want to really have that connection with our guests and make them feel welcome and make them feel like they're at home. Whether they're here for a local Louisiana conference for 3 days or they're traveling from some other part of the world, our ladies and gentlemen are trained to sort of pick up on, people that might be homesick or people that might be missing something or people that might not be quite satisfied, and try to read body language and cues to try to engage with them. And we have some very chatty ladies and gentlemen that like to, meet our guests and engage with them. And we also know when people don't want to be talked to too.
That's awesome. It makes you want to come back, which is your point. You want people to come back to your property. All right. So one of the questions that we both talked about in advance is we've talked about a little bit, dietary restrictions have become a lot more prevalent. So how can meeting planners and caterers work better together to appropriately, correctly, and effectively manage, food allergies and religious-based practices and personal preferences, vegan, vegetarian, and those could be personal to you, but they may be medically necessary for me, without causing a ruckus in the kitchen or in the front of the house, or make me sit there for 30 minutes waiting while I watch you eat while my food is being prepared.
Oh yeah, not a fun environment. And I've certainly been at events seated at tables with people who are waiting on their vegetarian meal or a special meal. And as frustrating it is for the guests to not be able to eat, it's frustrating for the people that are watching them not be able to eat and get frustrated, especially for those of us in the industry. We feel embarrassed for that caterer that they're not able to serve that guest quickly. So I think it all has to do with pre-communication between the venue management and the meeting planner, and making sure that the right data is being collected. As we talked about a little earlier, I think preferences of people about what they do want to eat is the first step, which helps reduce food waste. It helps optimize the menu for what they want. I had a group recently, and the meeting planner said, "Hey, I want to be honest with you. This is the demographic of the group. They're not going to want your fruit. They're not going to want muffins. They're not going to want yogurt. Give me a buffet, and I want it to be eggs, bacon, sausage, breakfast potatoes, and coffee. Like, don't give me all that stuff." And I was like, okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And she wasn't doing it because she wanted a lower price. She was doing it because she genuinely wanted to make sure that we were prepared for her group, but also wanted to make sure that we were able to reduce the complexity of a buffet, which during COVID can be more complicated. I think what you touched on is also an important thing, because we do have now a cornucopia of different data points that we need to collect as caterers and meeting planners that really span such a wide gamut of preparation opportunities. So certainly, on the one hand, you have religious practices, which are very particular and very culturally important for people to be compliant with, whether that is kosher meals or sourcing halal meats, or not commingling meat with dairy, or not serving beef at a function. We have all sorts of different concerns, and those are so culturally felt that it can be a huge embarrassment and blowback for a venue to insensitively manage that sourcing, production, and service of food. And I would say that in many ways, that is as important of a consideration as an allergy is, because even though a kosher guest isn't going to have an allergic reaction to eating pork or shellfish, it's actually more offensive to a religious guest to do that than it is anything. So I think on the one hand, that is very important. And, certainly we don't have a kosher kitchen here at the Ritz Carlton New Orleans. A lot of hotels don't. A lot of us have to source our kosher meals from outside caterers. So we have great relationships with that. We also do, as many venues do, keep a stash of frozen kosher meals on property. So if somebody pops up and says, "I need a kosher meal immediately," we have something that we can serve them. While it's not the freshly cooked food that we would like to serve them, we don't tell them no, of course. the halal meat scenario is a little bit more interesting for us because typically our Muslim guests are concerned about what's not in their food as much as they are what is in their food, as far as our sourcing goes of the halal meats, and making sure that we are doing that sourcing ethically and correctly and not substituting something that's not the right specification for their cultural and religious needs. But then we get into like dietary lifestyles and preferences. This is where things can get sort of gray because you do have people that have a religious level of fervor about their eating practices these days, whether it's a gluten-free guest that goes to the degree that a celiac or a gluten allergic guest does. But then you have people that eat gluten-free diets that are really just concerned about major contamination. And it really is hard for a caterer to calibrate whether someone is, a strict lifestyle or a lax lifestyle, right? So we have to go on the hotel side to the strict side. So if you tell me that you are a gluten-free lifestyle guest, I am going to do everything within my power to make sure that all the boxes are inspected, all the labels are checked, all of the blatant or explicit or likely cross-contamination is mitigated. And that's certainly something our culinary team gets a lot of annual training on in order to make sure that they're up to date with things and reminded of things because we don't always see every allergy here all the time.
Right.
But then certainly we have people that have severe allergies with, anaphylactic reactions, people that could die from eating something. And it's important for meeting planners to calibrate the two because I think sometimes we have an opportunity, and unfortunately I've never had to see this in my career, but you have an opportunity for a boy who cried wolf scenario of a venue that serves gluten-free guests all the time and, goes through like probably 80% of the right steps. And they're fine because they have gluten-free lifestyle guests. Well, one day they get a celiac guest and this person all of a sudden starts having cramps and keels over at their table because, you didn't check a food label correctly. So I would hate for that to happen to any caterer. But certainly I think that's where the cross and collaborative communication between venues and meeting planners needs to keep on improving is that there is a severe and serious difference between a lifestyle and an allergy.
Yes.
And, not that we should ever be lackadaisical, but there is an extra level of medical grade care that a caterer has to go through. And we know there's an allergy present versus a lifestyle selection. So, as far as it relates to what we do with menus, I am typically not a fan of removing items, altogether from a menu to accommodate a few people's special foods.
Right.
If I know that I have 2 or 3 people with a regular quote unquote nut allergy, I will tell the meeting planner that it's probably best that I just make those guests extra plates of food in any area where I need to. That way there isn't any accidental or involuntary cross-contamination. And that way I know those guests are getting purposeful made food for them. I'm not going to take every nut off a menu because that probably is actually more liability and concern for me to do than the opposite, which is to purposefully make food for them. But if I do know that a group has a large number of pescatarians or vegans or vegetarians, for example, or gluten-free guests, I might re-engineer the menu entirely. So that instead of, a traditional vegetable dish, I put together a vegetable dish that's high-end, natural, plant-based, or, other protein sources that I know that group will enjoy. If I know that I have a lot of gluten-free guests at an event, I might purposefully make sure that my soups or salad dressings or sauces are made without gluten altogether. So when there are accommodations that I think enhance a menu for a large number of guests, I think that it's our responsibility as caterers to do more of that. When I'm talking about a handful of guests, and especially when it's something serious, I probably want to have a little bit better collaboration with the meeting planner and guests to make sure they get exactly what they want and not some hodgepodge or some piece together, the buffet is labeled, go through the buffet. Like that's dangerous. I don't want, you and I have seen these tiny little menu cards that we put out in hotels that list like the 50 ingredients that go in a dish. And if every single guest with an allergy had to do that, they would probably be overwhelmed and not eat anything. And I think I've heard you talk about that on your other shows, is that sometimes our guests with special diets don't eat at events, which is horrible. And as a caterer in a hotel, I would much rather have tons and tons and tons of data to know that you have 30 guests and here are their names. and here's the type of food they want. That way my staff can be prepared for them. And the chef can know exactly what he's making in the back, versus a meeting planner not collecting any of that data. And then people trying to like pick through a buffet and like pick 3 things that they think are safe, when there are actually 10 things that are safe.
Right. Exactly. And the consistency of labeling makes it even more challenging, because if one of them says this is garlic free or contains this one says contains garlic, and the next one goes down and it doesn't say contains garlic or doesn't contain garlic. Yeah. How do you know? Yeah. So that consistency makes it really hard. And those little tiny things, you need a magnifying glass this big to read them, and it makes going through the line a lot longer as well. Yeah. So they just don't.
When you're in a contained environment, I think it's a little bit different than a hotel catering environment. So I used to work at Yale University several years ago, and we had a lot of student dining facilities. And students in a controlled dining environment can be trained to read food labels via icons and sort of like graphics. So we would have icons and sort of like code keys for the students. They'd be able to read a menu label and see that it contained shellfish or soy or, dairy. And it was very easy for them. But in a hotel environment, there's no consistency of how we label food. So you're right. It's very difficult for your average guest with a severe allergy or a lifestyle to be able to look at a food item and know what it does or doesn't contain from afar.
Yeah. And there was an article I wrote a couple of years ago, and I said, don't expect just because you go to a property with the same name in every single city, it's going to have the same information. And the editor's like, well, that goes against our training. And I said, there's 52,000 hotels in the US alone that they may carry this brand name, but they're owned by James and they're managed by Tracy. Or in this city, they're owned by Tracy and managed by James. And so that consistency is not there, which, that's hard to, for somebody to manage it. And we do have labeling laws on our prepackaged food. Mm-hmm. And we unfortunately don't have the labeling laws on unpackaged food like the European Union does. But even with those in the European Union, things fall through the cracks and don't happen. So I could just talk to you forever about this. There's so much to learn. And so 2 final questions.
Yeah.
How the pandemic has really hit our industry hard. Mm-hmm. And as the as a board member for NACE, how are we doing? I mean, and where do you think what we'll see post-pandemic from our industry?
So people are going to need each other more than ever in our post-pandemic world, because things like social distancing and packaged food and making guests feel safe isn't something that's going to go away the minute a vaccine is announced. Mm-hmm. So NACE is an ideal way for people to connect with a greater community, whether that's locally based in areas where we have chapters, meeting people that are in your industry. I always see the value of, I'm a hotel caterer, but I learned so much from my off-premise caterer and restaurant catering friends that I wouldn't normally be connected with without NACE. NACE is also a great place for national grade webinars and platforms and articles and things that people can look up that we do regularly. And the CPC certification, which is in my title there, is the Certified Professional in Catering and Events. And we talked a lot about catering and allergies and food safety in that program. And, unfortunately, I think we're going to have a lot of our members that go into 2021 looking for a job for the first time in 10, 15 years. And, the job market for the next 2 years is probably going to be the most competitive it's ever been for people in the catering and events world. And finding ways for people to stand out in a crowded industry and to show their reinvestment in themselves. I talk a lot about professional development. And one of the things I like to talk about is that, your employer is certainly going to look at your degree and your background and your experience. But what someone that's looking to promote you or hire you is also looking for is, what have you done for yourself lately? It's great that you've had this job for a while. It's great that you have a degree in this field. It's great that you have a certification, but what are you doing to continue your development? It's not about what you did a long time ago. It's what are you continuing to do? And being a member of an association getting a new certification, attending classes and virtual conferences like that EIC sustainability talk that I did 2 weeks ago. Those are the type of things that I think employers are going to be looking for of their employees more so than ever. And I would be looking for if I were hiring right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is, take this time, whether you're a property or a planner or whatever, to take this time to learn as much as you possibly can so that you can bring that to the table and be a better lady or gentleman with the services that you can provide. Because, as a banquet server, to me, that's going to be important to say, hey, boss man, this is what I did. And I don't want to be mean and saying, instead of saying home and not doing anything and moping about it, I was very upfront and took this initiative. And that's what you should look at me for. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think throughout my time here at the Ritz Carlton, even before that, I have a long record of developing people out of working for me, which is sort of funny to think about that way. But, my goal is not that people work with me or for me forever. It's that they work with me or for me long enough to get to their next job. And hopefully that is with the company and with the Ritz Carlton or Marriott, but in some cases it's not. But I see that as my sort of industry duty is to develop people into their next role, and encouraging people to be involved in associations and certifications and continuing education is how we do that.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Okay, so one final question. What's your favorite food and beverage?
So we'll start with beverage. That's a little easier. I am very passionate about wine. I've taken a number of continuing education programs on wine throughout my career. I probably drink wine 6 out of 7 nights of the week for academic reasons as much as enjoyment reasons. I particularly love French white wine. So Loire Valley wine, Sancerres, the crisper style of French wines like the Chablis from Burgundy, some of the great dry Rieslings and wines out of Alsace. Champagne, of course. Love everything about champagne. Blanc de Blanc, your rosé champagne, vintage champagne. Anything made in that style is certainly exciting to me. And Italian red wines, big fan of the northern Italian red wines, your Piedmontese and Tuscan wines especially. As far as food, I'm originally from the Philadelphia area, so I have a large passion for Italian food as part of my heritage. But over the years, I've become quite a barbecue lover and aficionado. And by barbecue, I mean our traditional Southern, slow cooked and smoked, and a lot of love into the food. Not so much into the sweet styles of barbecue. I definitely prefer spice, vinegar, mustard, dry rub type barbecue. Anytime I can travel and try out new barbecue places, I do that. Louisiana isn't specifically known for barbecue, but there's a lot of great places down here that do hodgepodge of, Carolina, Memphis, Texas barbecue. So absolutely love any type of smoked meat, pork, beef, chicken, doesn't really matter what it is. It's all good to me.
Awesome. Well, I would love to see you pair your wine with that barbecue.
Yeah, that is an interesting combination there. And, one of the reasons why I love barbecue so much is one of those things that I can't cook at home. I cook a lot at home, and there are many things that I can cook myself, being a trained chef a long time ago. But without, the big smokers and the facilities, I can't make barbecue at all. So it's one of the reasons why I love it so much. But barbecue can be very food friendly. I usually have to sort of pick the right wine combinations, whether you're trying to match the intensity, which can be hard sometimes, or to sort of counteract the rich fattiness that some types of barbecue have with more acidic styles of wine, but all sorts of great combinations you can have there.
Well, thank you so much, James, for what you do for the industry and for being here on the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, Tracy.
You're welcome. So everybody, thank you for listening. This is the Eating at a Meeting podcast, and I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath. You can tell your friends about the podcast. They can get it on every podcast platform that's out there, so they can choose their favorite. Let me know if you want me to interview anyone else about food and beverage and any kind of aspects around food and beverage, and we'll get to it. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.